Picture this. It's 3 in the morning in a hospital somewhere in the world. A child lies on an operating table, bleeding internally after a car accident. The surgeons know exactly what needs to be done. A blood transfusion could save this young life in minutes. But standing in the corridor, the parents are saying no. Not because they don't love their child. Not because they don't understand the danger. But because their religion forbids it. Now freeze that moment. Because in that hallway, in that impossible decision, you're witnessing one of the most profound conflicts of our time. A collision between two forces that define modern civilization itself. This isn't a story about one hospital, one family, or even one country. This is happening right now, in emergency rooms across every continent. In London and Tokyo. In São Paulo and Johannesburg. In Toronto and Mumbai. The faces change, the languages change, but the question remains exactly the same. How far does religious freedom go when a child's life hangs in the balance? And here's what makes this so compelling. The entire world has had to answer this question. Not theoretically, not philosophically, but in real courtrooms, with real families, and real children whose lives depended on what judges decided in the next few hours. Let me take you inside what doctors actually experience. A physician in Canada described it this way: the parents arrive with their child, and you can see the love in their eyes. They're terrified. But they hand you a card, sometimes laminated, sometimes worn from being carried in a wallet for years, that says, "No blood transfusions." And then they look at you with this mixture of hope and fear, hoping you can save their child, but also hoping you won't use the one thing that might actually work. In Australia, an emergency room nurse recalled, "I've seen parents crying, begging us to find another way, any other way." They're not monsters. They're people caught between what their religion tells them and what every instinct as a parent is screaming at them to do. A surgeon in Brazil said something that haunts me. You're standing there with a solution in your hands, literally bags of blood that could save this child in minutes, and you're watching the clock tick because someone's interpretation of an ancient text says you can't use it. This is the reality. Not abstract. Not theoretical. Human beings making impossible choices. When did this all begin? The modern chapter of the story really exploded in the 1960s and 70s. That's when Jehovah's Witnesses, who had formalized their blood doctrine in the 1940s, became more visible, more organized, and more numerous. Suddenly, hospitals everywhere were facing something they'd never had to deal with before. Patients with advanced directives refusing what doctors considered essential, life-saving treatment. The medical community was divided. Some doctors said, "Respect their wishes, it's their body." Others said, "We took an oath to save lives. How can we just watch someone die?" And the legal system? The legal system had no roadmap for this. But then something remarkable happened. Starting in different countries, at different times, but following a pattern that's almost eerie in its consistency, courts around the world began reaching the same conclusions. Not because they copied each other. Many of these early decisions happened before the internet made international legal research easy. They reached the same conclusions because they were all facing the same human reality. Let's start with adults, because that's where the consensus formed first, and it's actually the simpler part of this story. In 1990, Canada faced the case of Georgette Mallet. She'd been in a terrible car accident and arrived at the hospital unconscious, bleeding, dying. In her purse was a card stating she was a Jehovah's Witness and refused blood under any circumstances. The doctor, Dr. Schulman, faced an agonizing choice: respect the card and watch her die, or give her blood and face the consequences later. He gave her the blood. She survived. And then she sued him. The court sided with her. Think about that for a moment. She sued the doctor who saved her life, and she won. The Ontario Court of Appeal said something that would echo around the world. A competent adult has the right to determine what shall be done with their own body, even if that decision appears irrational to others, even if it will result in death. That same year, across the ocean in Britain, similar cases were building to the same conclusion. The Reti case in 1992 became a landmark. Lord Donaldson put it bluntly: an adult of sound mind has an absolute right to refuse medical treatment, for rational or irrational reasons or for no reason at all. Now, you might be thinking, that's insane. How can we just let people die? But here's the thing, and this is crucial: these courts weren't celebrating death. They were defending something they saw as even more fundamental. The principle that your body is yours. That in a free society, the government cannot strap you down and force medical treatment on you, even to save your life. It's the same principle that says the state can't force you to donate a kidney, even if someone will die without it. The same principle that says you can refuse chemotherapy, even if it means cancer will kill you. Your body, your choice. Even when that choice is death. And something interesting happened as this principle spread globally. It wasn't just Western democracies. Courts in Japan reached similar conclusions. So did courts in South Korea, in Brazil, in South Africa. Countries with completely different legal systems, different religious backgrounds, different political structures, all arriving at roughly the same place. Why? Because once you start forcing medical treatment on competent adults who refuse it, where do you stop? Do you force people to exercise? To eat healthy? To quit smoking? The principle of bodily autonomy, once you break it, becomes very hard to limit. But, and this is the crucial but, everything changes when we're talking about children. Now we come to the heart of the matter, the real battlefield, the place where this global consensus becomes absolutely uncompromising. Let me tell you about a case that happened in England in 1993. A 15-year-old boy, we'll call him E, because that's how the court records refer to him, was diagnosed with leukemia. He was a Jehovah's Witness, raised in the faith, and he made what seemed like a remarkably mature decision. He would refuse blood transfusions, even if it meant his death. When the case came before Justice Ward, the judge was genuinely moved by the boy's courage and conviction. He noted that he was articulate, thoughtful, and sincere. But then Justice Ward said something that cuts to the core of this entire issue. He may now, in the full flush of youth, think that he would refuse blood. But the instinct for survival is strong. He is young. He may change his mind. But if he dies now, he will have no chance to change his mind. The judge ordered the transfusion. And here's what's fascinating. He based his decision partly on the fact that in 3 years, when the boy turned 18, he could make this choice for himself. The court wasn't denying him religious freedom forever, just postponing life and death decisions until he had the maturity and legal standing to make them. That case became a blueprint. Not because every country follows English common law, but because the reasoning was so compelling that it traveled. It appeared in Canadian judgments. Australian courts cited it. Even judges in civil law countries, who don't technically follow precedent the same way, reached similar conclusions for similar reasons. The American experience. When the First Amendment meets the emergency room. Now, the United States has the strongest constitutional protections for religious freedom in the world. The First Amendment is sacred text in American law. So you might think American courts would be more sympathetic to parents refusing blood for their children, right? Wrong. Absolutely wrong. In fact, American courts have been among the most aggressive in overriding parental religious objections when children's lives are at stake. And there's a Supreme Court case from way back in 1944, Prince versus Massachusetts, that explains why. Justice Rutledge wrote something that became the foundation for every subsequent case. Parents may be free to become martyrs themselves. But it does not follow they are free to make martyrs of their children. Think about that phrasing. Free to make martyrs of their children. That's what courts around the world saw happening. Parents, with the best intentions, with genuine love and genuine faith, making decisions that would turn their children into religious martyrs. Children who never got to decide for themselves whether they wanted to be martyrs at all. And so state after state, in case after case, American courts said no. Florida said no. New York said no. California said no. Even in the Bible Belt, even in states where religious conservatism runs deep, courts said, not with children's lives. Not ever. What's particularly striking is what happened in Brazil. Because Brazil doesn't get as much attention in these international discussions, but Brazilian courts have dealt with hundreds, literally hundreds, of cases involving blood transfusions and minors. And you know what? The pattern is identical. Different legal system. Brazil follows civil law, not common law. Different primary religion. Brazil is the largest Catholic country in the world. Different language, different culture, different everything. But when it comes to children and blood transfusions, The same answer over and over. Courts authorize the transfusion, overriding parental objection. The Brazilian Superior Court of Justice hasn't just ruled on this once or twice. They've established clear, consistent jurisprudence. Religious freedom is constitutionally protected, absolutely. But it has limits. And that limit is another person's life, especially a child's life who cannot consent. Now let's jump to Asia, because this is where it gets really interesting from a cultural standpoint. Asian societies often operate on fundamentally different principles than Western ones. The Western emphasis on individual rights can seem alien in cultures where family, community, and collective harmony are paramount. In traditional Confucian thinking, parental authority isn't just respected, it's foundational to social order. So you might expect Asian courts to defer more to parents, right? To see this as a family matter, not something for the state to interfere in? But no. When it comes to life-saving treatment for children, even courts in Japan and South Korea, countries where family authority is deeply respected, have authorized transfusions over parental objection. Why? Because even in societies that prioritize collective good and family authority, there's a recognition that children are not property. That parents don't own their children's lives. That a child's future autonomy, their chance to grow up and make their own decisions, outweighs even deeply held cultural values about parental authority. The medical revolution, that wasn't enough. Now, while all this legal drama was unfolding, something else was happening. Medicine was evolving. And this evolution was partly driven by these very cases. Major medical centers started developing what they called bloodless medicine programs. The Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, hospitals around the world began innovating. They developed techniques to minimize blood loss during surgery. They used medications to boost patients' own blood production. They got better at recycling patients' blood during operations. And you know what? It worked. Kind of. For certain procedures, in certain situations, they found they could do amazing things without transfusions. Some Jehovah's Witnesses had successful major surgeries without a drop of donated blood. The religious community pointed to this and said, "See? We were right to push for alternatives." And honestly, they had a point. Their advocacy did push medical science in valuable directions. But, and this is a crucial but, all those amazing techniques have limits. When someone is in a car accident and bleeding out, erythropoietin won't help. When a child has internal bleeding from a ruptured organ, cell salvage devices won't save them. When you need blood now, nothing else works. And that's where the medical community drew their line. In non-emergency situations, with proper planning, for certain procedures? Sure, let's try bloodless approaches. But in an emergency, when minutes count and a child is dying, blood transfusion remains irreplaceable. Here's what makes this so heartbreaking. In almost every one of these cases, the parents genuinely love their children. This isn't child abuse in the conventional sense. These aren't parents who are neglectful or cruel. These are parents who believe, with absolute conviction, that they're protecting their child's eternal soul. Imagine being in that position. You believe, truly, deeply believe, that if your child receives blood, they'll lose their chance at eternal life. You're not weighing your child's earthly life against your convenience or your preferences. You're weighing it against eternity. One father, after a court ordered a transfusion for his daughter, said something that stuck with me: "They saved her life today, but they may have condemned her soul forever." He wasn't angry. He was devastated. And you know what the really tragic part is? The religious organization that put him in that position, the organization that told him blood is forbidden, has changed their position on blood fractions multiple times over the decades. Things that were absolutely forbidden 20 years ago are now conscience matters. Things that would have gotten you disfellowshipped in 1980 are now acceptable. So these parents are agonizing over decisions based on doctrines that aren't even stable. They're making martyrs of their children based on interpretations that the same organization might revise in 10 years. So what's the takeaway from all this? What's the global consensus that's emerged? It's actually quite simple, even if the cases are complex. Adults have freedom. Children have protection. If you're an adult, mentally competent, fully informed, and you want to refuse a blood transfusion, even if it means you'll die, that's your right. The state will respect that. Courts around the world have said so, repeatedly and clearly. But if you're trying to make that decision for your child, the answer is no. From London to Tokyo, from Ottawa to Johannesburg, from Rome to Seoul, the answer is no. Religious freedom is real, it's protected, it's valued. But it doesn't include the right to let your child die when there's a treatment that could save them. This isn't persecution. This isn't discrimination. This is society saying that children are not the property of their parents, that they have their own right to grow up, to develop their own beliefs, to make their own choices when they're old enough. Why this matters now? You might be wondering, why are we talking about this? Is this still relevant? Absolutely. Because this issue isn't going away. If anything, it's getting more complex. As medicine advances, the situations get murkier. As religious diversity increases in many countries, the conflicts multiply. And as social media amplifies every controversy, these cases become flashpoints in larger cultural battles. But more than that, this issue tells us something fundamental about who we are as a global society. In an age where we seem to agree on less and less, where every issue becomes polarized, where cultural and political divides seem unbridgeable, on this question, we've reached a consensus. That consensus is, no matter how deeply you believe something, no matter how sacred your convictions, no matter how sincere your faith, you cannot sacrifice a child to those beliefs. The child's chance at life, their chance to grow up and make their own choices, takes precedence. And that brings us back to where we started, that hallway in the hospital at 3 a.m. The parents in anguish. The child on the operating table. The doctors with bags of blood that could save a life. What's the price of freedom? How far does it extend? And at what point does society have to step in and say, not this far, not when an innocent life hangs in the balance? The world has answered that question. Country by country, court by court, case by case, the answer has been the same. It's not a perfect answer. It doesn't resolve all the anguish. It doesn't make the parents hurt any less. But it's the answer we've arrived at, because it's the only answer that protects those who cannot protect themselves. Adults may choose their own fate. But children must be protected, even from their parents' most sacred convictions. That's where the global consensus stands. And unless something dramatic changes in how we understand both medicine and human rights, that's where it will remain.